Margaret Thompson was no stranger to solitude. At 72, she lived alone in her small farmhouse tucked deep into the snowy hills of Montana. Her days were filled with quiet routines, feeding her hens, knitting by the fireplace, and listening to the old records her late husband, Frank, had loved. Winters were particularly harsh, but Margaret was used to them. She knew how to stack enough firewood, preserve enough food, and wrap herself in layers of warmth against the biting cold. That particular February evening, however, was unlike any she had seen in years. The snowstorm came in fierce, dumping heaps of snow that swallowed the road, rattled the windows, and painted the world in a heavy white curtain. The wind howled like a lonely wolf, and even the hens in the barn huddled quietly, as if in respect for the storm's power. Margaret had just settled in with a cup of chamomile tea when she heard it, a deep, throaty rumble in the distance. At first she thought it was thunder, but thunder in the middle of a snowstorm made little sense. The sound grew louder until suddenly, through the blizzard, she saw a row of motorcycles struggling their way up her narrow road. Their headlights cut weak beams through the swirling snow. She rubbed her glasses, disbelieving. 15 massive men in leather jackets, their vests stitched with patches that read Hell's Angels, pulled into her yard. Snow clung to their beards, their shoulders, and their boots. They looked like shadows of some wild legend stumbling out of the storm. Margaret's first instinct was fear. Her late husband had often told her tales of bikers and their wild reputations. She had heard of bar fights, roaring engines, and intimidating tattoos. And here they were, 15 of them, at her door while the storm raged. There was a heavy knock. "Ma'am?" a gravelly voice called, muffled through the wood. "We don't mean no harm. The storm caught us off guard. Our bikes are freezing up. Could we maybe just warm up for a while?" Margaret's heart pounded. She looked at the door, then at her fire crackling warmly. Fear wrestled with compassion. Finally, she set her teacup down and pulled the door open. The wind burst in first, followed by towering figures of men covered in leather and patches. One man, tall with graying hair and kind eyes behind the toughness of his beard, stepped forward. "We're stuck out here," he said, his breath fogging in the cold. "Name's Jack. We'll leave as soon as it clears, we promise." Margaret hesitated only for a moment before stepping aside. "Well, don't just stand there and freeze," she said, surprising herself with her firmness. "Come in." The men shuffled inside, stamping their boots and brushing snow from their jackets. The warmth of the little farmhouse wrapped around them, and they sighed with relief. The sight was almost comical. 15 burly bikers hunched awkwardly in a cozy living room, decorated with lace curtains and porcelain figurines. At first, the silence was heavy. Margaret busied herself with the kettle, unsure of what to say. But then one of the bikers spotted the framed picture on the mantel. Her husband, Frank, in his military uniform. "Was he Army?" asked the biker respectfully. "Vietnam," Margaret replied softly. "He passed 10 years ago." The biker nodded solemnly. "My old man served there too." And just like that, the ice began to melt. Margaret found herself moving between the kitchen and the living room, handing out steaming mugs of tea, then soup she had been saving. The men, to her surprise, were polite, thanking her, offering to help carry firewood, even mopping the floor where snow had melted off their boots. They told her stories of the road, of long rides through deserts and mountains, of sunrises over highways, and the brotherhood they shared. One of them, a younger man named Chris, even offered to fix the broken hinge on her back door. Another noticed her woodpile was running low and trudged back out into the storm to bring in more. Margaret, in turn, found herself laughing at their tales, her loneliness dissolving in the unlikely company of 15 strangers. She even told them stories of her youth, how she and Frank had once driven cross-country in an old Ford truck with nothing but $50 and a map. By the time midnight came, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Blankets were spread across her living room floor, and the bikers settled in like children at a sleepover. Margaret shook her head in disbelief as she climbed into her own bed, whispering a prayer that tomorrow, the storm, and her unexpected guests would pass. Morning broke with silence. The storm had stopped, leaving behind a thick blanket of white that sparkled in the pale sunlight. Margaret rose early, expecting the men to be gone, but when she stepped into the living room, they were still there, gathered around the fire, talking quietly. Jack stood when he saw her. "We can't thank you enough, ma'am," he said. "Most people wouldn't open their door to us, but you did. We won't forget it." Margaret smiled, though her heart still carried some disbelief. "Well, I couldn't just let you freeze out there." One by one, the bikers shook her hand, some even giving her gentle hugs, their eyes softer than their rugged appearances suggested. Then they filed out into the bright snow, their boots crunching as they brushed off their bikes. Engines roared back to life, and the rumble faded down the road. Margaret stood at her window, sipping tea, watching until they disappeared. She thought that would be the end of her unusual story. But it wasn't. The very next afternoon, the sound returned, this time louder, deeper, like 100 thunderstorms rolling together. Margaret's eyes widened as dozens of motorcycles came down her road, forming a long, gleaming line that wrapped around her yard. She hurried outside, clutching her shawl against the cold. Jack was at the front, smiling. Behind him were bikers she hadn't seen before, men and women, young and old, all wearing the same vests, the same patches. The air shook with the growl of engines, but the sight was not frightening. It was astonishing. "What on earth?" Margaret whispered. Jack dismounted his bike and approached. "We told the club about you, Margaret," he said. "How you opened your home, no questions asked, when we needed it most. That kind of kindness, Margaret. It doesn't go unnoticed." She blinked in shock as several bikers began unloading things from the backs of their bikes, bags of groceries, bundles of firewood, even a brand new generator. One woman carried a quilt she had sewn herself. Another man set down boxes of canned goods. "We'd take care of our own," Jack explained, "and after last night, your family." Tears stung Margaret's eyes as she looked around. Dozens of rough, leather-clad men and women stood in her yard, offering her more than she had ever expected. Not charity, but gratitude, respect. For the first time in years, her little farmhouse was alive with voices, laughter, and warmth. The loneliness she had carried since Frank's passing lifted, replaced by something new, a sense of belonging, of unexpected friendship. As the bikers shared stories and helped her stack the firewood, Margaret thought to herself how wrong the world had been about judging books by their covers. These men and women, feared by many, had given her something priceless in return for a simple act of kindness. They had given her family. That winter, the farmhouse never felt empty again. Whenever the roar of motorcycles echoed down her road, Margaret no longer felt fear. Only joy, because she knew they were hers now, her angels in leather, her protectors on two wheels. And as she often said to neighbors who asked about the day dozens of Hell's Angels lined up at her door, "I gave them shelter from the storm, but what they gave me was so much greater. They gave me back my heart."